At Digital History Pioneers Foundation, we are about grassroots history on digital platforms. That means we are about podcasters, documentarians, YouTubers, and even TikTokers. All of these creators are out there trying to share their love of history with the public. They don't need ideas, they need funding, both from viewers and corporate donors. DH Pioneers' initial funding focus is on the Civil War era, with a special emphasis on the Addressing Gettysburg podcast. So be a vital part of the unique content Addressing Gettysburg has in store by donating at dhpioneers.com and help bring your love of history to the people. Digital History Pioneers is an IRS Section 501c3 approved charitable corporation that makes any donation tax deductible to the fullest extent of the law.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios,
you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, patrons, and welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we have our friend Doug Douds on. Doug, you might recall from a couple of years ago, I think it was, we did an episode about the Gettysburg Address. And it was one of my favorite episodes to do. I hope you liked listening to it. But today we're talking about something else. Something that doesn't really always get attention in the history books. It's because it's, as Doug was saying before the show, kind of boring. But hopefully we won't make it boring for you because, you know, you're interested in this stuff anyway, so it might actually be useful. We're talking about staffs. What is a staff? And what does a staff do? And what were the differences between Lee's staff at Gettysburg and Meade's staff at Gettysburg? Welcome, Doug Douds.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Also known as Louis Trott. You know that joke?
No.
Ralph and Louis were on the show once before, and Ralph kept calling him Doug Douds. And Louis didn't get it at first. And he's like, what the hell is he calling me Doug Douds for? And then, so now, you know, it's a little joke.
There we go.
Yeah. All right. So staffs.
Yes.
We always hear, of course, you know, we know Major Taylor from the movie. Sort of know Marshall. Moxley Sorrell, we know.
Yeah.
The other guy. Who's the other guy that fell off the horse at the end? Shit. Mike, well, come on.
What are you asking me?
In the movie, Longstreet's guy, the one that TJ, he calls him TJ, and he falls off the horse, and when the shell goes off, and he's like, "You're all right, TJ?" He's like, "I'm tolerable, sir."
Gory,
Captain Gory.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. So we know these guys from the movie, right? But and then of course there's Union staff officers that we know not from the movie, but just because we read about it. Dan Butterfield, of course, being one of them. Seth Williams. So okay, what is a staff? Or before we get to what is, why? Why do you have a staff? Why does a general have a staff?
Yeah, it's a fundamental question, but you go like, when does staff work really begin? Probably some point in the Neolithic age when two cavemen stood on the either side of a field and one asked his buddy, "What do you think we should do?" That's the first staff officer on Earth. So effectively what they do is they help inform advance the commander's thinking. They are specialists who have specialized knowledge in some field or another by the American Civil War. Think artillery, engineering, signals, medical care. Okay. They also are extensions of the commander. They are his legs, they're his eyes to get to places he cannot see, his extension of his ears to hear things he cannot hear, an extension of his mind to help consider possibilities that he does not know. And on top of that, they take care of mundane tasks so that the commander can command.
Yeah. So being a commander has got to be a difficult job, no matter what level you're at, right? But the higher you go, the more responsibility you have. More money, more problems. So you're at the head of an army, and you got way too much to worry about. And you can't possibly handle all of it. So you need these people. This makes sense to me, right?
Well, what we really see is, you know, when we often talk about the Civil War as the last of the old war and first of the new.
Yeah.
This is a transition point. Like in the old time,
pull the mic a little closer. I'm sorry.
Alexander the Great could stand there and with a sweep of an eye, look at a field, you know, go talk to Parmenio, hold the left, I'll be on the right, see you in some time.
Right.
Okay, but now over time, battlefields have grown, armies get bigger, their size grows. This is part of the changing character of war. You can't do that anymore.
Right.
You actually need a team to help you do all of those things.
Too complicated.
There it is. It's the complexity, scope, scale, and speed of warfare is growing. And so what you see is in the American Civil War, you can still be successful using the old way, although your margins are getting tighter. And what you're starting to see is the growth of staffs will actually become the way armies fight in the 20th century. So we're in the midst of that war as it was and war as it will be.
So it's interesting that the Civil War, because there's many instances where, to me, the Confederates, and I'm talking army wise, but also kind of in personality of the different characters in the army. Lee, let's take for example. I always use this example. You go to Appomattox. We'll fast forward, and Lee shows up in this resplendent uniform, polished boots, polished sword, and Grant shows up covered in mud. And to me, that is a signal of the death of chivalry, the death of the old way. And sometimes things take a while, and this, in the case of that and the old South, it's got to die a violent death. And Grant is ushering in the new type of American, the guy who's, he's got 3 stars on his shoulders, but he's not afraid to get dirty. And so to me, Gettysburg is a good way when you look at the staffs, is to look at, an army that's. Now, this is, I'm sure I'm oversimplifying it, and there's more than one reason for it, but, Lee's army is it's representing the old way, right? And it's maybe a little more mired in tradition than the Union Army. And maybe it's because they're doing kind of all right in the last year, right? And the Union Army isn't. And so okay, well, we got to keep trying new things until we figure out what works, because we got to win this war. Right. So they seem to be a little more forward thinking and innovative, and also willing to look at the situation around them today, not how it's been, but what is it today and how do we adapt? Am I correct?
Yeah. So this is really interesting, because when you think about it, first of all, we never had a field army before. Like we talk about, Winfield Scott, Mexico City and all that. Yeah, it's 13,000 guys. Mm-hmm. That's not even the size of a corps. Right. We've never had a field army, 100,000 men. So when we get around and we say, he was in West Point, or, so he doesn't know how to command a corps. Nobody knew how to command a corps. Nobody knew how to command a division, let alone an army made up of corps. This is all novel learning at the American Civil War. So they come out of one army, the United States Army. They look the same. First Manassas. Both armies kind of look alike.
Right.
But then, after a year and a half of war, with the experience that the Army of Northern Virginia have, victories, Robert E. Lee, talent management, Army of the Potomac losing, continually new commander each time, those start to diverge. And by the summer of 1863, I would argue they're different armies. And we see the differences in particular in the staffs. In part because this is how they've responded. Robert E. Lee, a year and a half in, he knows his staff isn't that great because he realizes this is peninsula. He goes, we can't coordinate these attacks. I got a staff problem. But he's always overcome with a couple things. One, he doesn't want to build a big staff because he doesn't want to set an example of all these generals riding around with an entourage. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to, if he has any real talent, specifically by summer of 1863, if you were really good, I need you leading a brigade. Okay. So I'm loath to keep too much talent here. So I'm trying to stay lean and mean. And the other thing is, Lee always has some competing priority that's way more important to him than fixing his staff. How do I organize my army? Second Bull Run, Antietam. How do I fix my artillery because it's my weakest branch? How do I feed my army? All of these are bigger issues than the problems with his staff, because in the end, they just continue to win.
And every one of those is a full-time job. How do you feed an army? If the commanding general has to worry about that, he's never going to be able to command the rest of the army because he's worried about feeding them. And you got to feed an army every day.
That's a great point. And because the exigencies of feeding his army is so great, he never spends a whole lot of time doing anything else, like coming up with a new staff structure. Meanwhile, the Army of the Potomac that is lost continually for a year and a half, they don't get to pick the new commander. Lincoln does. But the institutional response of the Army of the Potomac is, not unlike the Prussians in 1806. What do you do when Napoleon shows up at your border and you don't have a Frederick the Great? Well, you lose badly to start. That's right. You lose badly to start. And then they go, we're going to build a general staff. The Army of the Potomac does the same thing. Their institutional response is, we're going to build really great staff officers. And each commanding general that has come in has identified some talent and brought it on board. And if you were really good at your job, the next commander goes in and goes, oh, I'm leaving that guy in place. And so when Meade takes over 3 days before the battle, he inherits an utterly professional staff.
So, and that's Hooker.
Yeah, well,
that we have to thank for that, right?
Well, but go all the way back to George B. McClellan brings on a chief of staff. We've never had a chief of staff. That position doesn't exist in the Army. So he creates a position that now exists. But each one of these guys has put their fingerprint on. Hooker in particular brings the Bureau of Military Information, and he makes the cavalry chief a corps commander. So those are his two big ones, I would argue. But everybody else has found guys along the way and plugged them in. And then once they're there, if they're good, it doesn't matter what the personality of the commander is. They're like, oh, I'm leaving that guy.
And Doug, one great example of the wealth of staff that Meade inherits when he takes over the Army is what happens with, Farnsworth, Merritt, and Custer, right? They go from staff right out into brigade command. I mean, they're talented people.
Yeah, but so you bring up an interesting point because that's cavalry. I mean, if we think about Meade, like Meade's, in my opinion, the most qualified guy ever to command the Army, right? He's been in every branch except the cav.
Yeah.
So on the day he takes over, what does he do? He actually de-operationalizes Pleasanton. You're a corps commander, but I don't need you in the field, mostly because I don't think you're really that good, and you're not that good at getting the information, and that's what I need.
Right.
Oh, by the way, it's the one branch he hasn't been in. So when he says, put your tent near mine, what he just did was empowered a bunch of good division commanders so that when the information comes into the headquarters, he gets it.
Yeah.
The other thing he does is he takes Hunt, and this is a choice for both cav and artillery officers, is they can either be staff officers or commanding. And it's up to the commander of the Army, and he operationalizes Henry Hunt. He makes him a commander. Those two small, subtle decisions on day one reap massive benefits for his Army for the next part of the campaign.
So is Lee at any point, but at any point in the war, from beginning to end, when he takes over to the end of the war, does he ever come around to this way of thinking?
Yes and no. His staff gets better as the war gets on because they get more reps, I would argue.
Sure.
But the other thing is he's still constrained by the same things. Can't have too big a staff. If I have talent, I need you out leading. Oh, by the way, I've got bigger problems than my staff. So it's still what you end up with from, I would argue, Gettysburg on is kind of the individual genius of Robert E. Lee against the collective genius of the Army of the Potomac.
So what do people on the staff do more specifically? I mean, you kind of gave us a general idea there, but like, let's start with Lee because he's got the smaller staff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with him. Who's his chief of staff?
So Robert Chilton is his chief of staff. He was in the old Army. He's one of his few close staff officers that had previous experience. He was a paymaster in the old Army. He's an okay chief of staff. I mean, we have multiple cases of where Chilton kind of bungles things, 2nd Manassas, Special Order 191, however we want to do this. But nonetheless, he had experience before. So that's his chief of staff.
And then what would be below the chief of staff?
So then what we really have is a series of different positions. This really goes back to Washington pulls the bureau system from the British. And that's how we organize. And the staff is the bureaus in Washington and Richmond. This would be your inspector generals responsible for readiness and training, your judge advocate generals, your adjutant generals who write up orders and distribute orders, your paymaster who pays, ordnance chief, arms and ammunition, quartermaster, supplies, horses, forage, your commissary, how do we feed our people? And then we start to get into some specific engineers, topographical engineers certainly before 1863. Signal officers becomes the newest bureau. So it's not necessarily at planning level, but it's how we manage stuff and personnel.
So you mentioned DC and Richmond. So is there somebody back there, like say in commissary? So there's somebody back there on the governmental level. And then what does he have? One of his minions attached to someone's staff, like Meade's staff?
Yeah, so when we think about this, we normally think about like Montgomery Meigs is the quartermaster general. He's the quartermaster general in Washington, D.C. That's why when we talk about Rufus Ingalls, we say he's the assistant quartermaster general because he's assistant to Montgomery Meigs.
Okay.
That's how that relationship works.
Okay.
These are staff officers that have a relationship back to Washington, D.C. in this technical area.
So then are they technically members of the Army or are they like more akin to, well, just for lack of a better word, an observer. I know they're more active than an observer, but like they're not actually in the Army.
They are in the Army.
But not the Army of the Potomac.
Yeah, so this becomes interesting. I think this is, I would also argue, here's a difference between the two armies.
Okay.
I would argue if you're a staff officer in the Army of the Potomac, you're in the Army of the Potomac, and you're a liaison back to the Bureau. If you're in Robert E. Lee's Army,
that's the word I should have used, yes.
If you're in Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, you're a member of the Bureau liaisoning to the Army of Northern Virginia.
Okay.
It's really super subtle, but it gets into kind of the supporting and supported roles.
But I think that's interesting because to me, I would rather have the Army of the Potomac situation if I'm the commander, because you're number one part of my army. You're not a spy. I would look at you as a spy if you're coming from DC, right? Is that, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's pretty accurate.
Okay.
Now, I don't know that anybody in the Army of Northern Virginia that was in one of these positions would have characterized the way I did, but if you look at their relationship back to their capitals, I think this is how it plays out.
Okay, that's interesting. So, I'm the commander of the Army. I've got this staff. I've got all these things that these guys are taking care of for me. So what am I doing? What do I have to do?
Yeah, so what we really have is, certainly prior to 1863, an Army commander is his own as operations officer and intelligence officer. We'll start to see where this changes, certainly for the Army of the Potomac, because with the Bureau of Military Information in our provost marshal, we now have somebody doing all source intelligence, doing analysis, not merely handing me raw data for me to figure out what's going on.
Okay.
So when we think about the commanding officer as his own operations officer, they're thinking about how to defeat the other army.
So they're dealing more with strategy.
Yeah, they're outward focused. It's focused against the threat, not how do I run my organization.
Right, yeah. So you guys got my back.
You look down and in, I look up out.
Here's what I want to do. Can we do it?
Yeah.
How many men do we have? Where's the food? Where's the ammunition trains? Like where all that? You guys are going to tell me that.
Yeah, and so now even as you bring up the what can we do? If you really want to talk about it, if you take the staff of the Army and the senior subordinate commanders, corps commanders, that I would argue is a commander's commanding machine. That's what he uses to run the Army. Mm-hmm. That looks down and in. His commanders are going to translate his ideas and intent into actions on a battlefield. It takes both of those together.
So, and they've got their own staff.
They do.
And so like a Longstreet or a Hancock or whoever, they've got a staff, same number of people or same roles?
So it's a good question. They do. The size of your staff trickles down as you go down, so you end up at a regiment.
Right.
But the responsibilities, you still got to feed people. You still got to arm them. You still got to get ammunition. You still have to pay them. All that stuff just trickles down to the lowest level. So you do have staff officers all the way down. The staffs just get smaller as you go.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's okay. You've got a whole dissertation here. So give us some more information that you have in there that you'd like to share with us.
Well, so it's when we think about the idea of even just comparing the staffs, it was kind of one of your questions. Like, what's the difference? Well, so even the people that are on Meade's staff, if you take, we were talking about Seth Williams, the adjutant. He becomes an adjutant in 1850. When we think about, we were just talking about Walter Taylor. He becomes one in 1861. Henry Clark becomes the commissariat in 48. Robert Cole for Robert E. Lee becomes one in 1861. Even if we think about Henry Hunt becomes an artillerist in 1839, William Pendleton, well, he was one for about 3 years, and then he got out. He really became an artillerist again in 1861. If you look at how long these guys have been doing their job, like they know the system, they know how it works, they know how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
They know how these things have developed and got to where they got. So they are much more experienced, have much more time doing the job, which is trying to fight the army or trying to supply and manage the army.
Right.
Whereas Lee's it's a pickup game on day one. Every one of Lee's staff officers on the day he takes command resigns except for one kid. So he picks up his all-new staff. They begin on the day that Lee begins.
What was the reason they resigned for? Was it just...
Well, as part of this is what kind of staffs you have. Are you tied to the person, your personal staff? So Lee really begins anew on the day that he takes command.
So his staff is pretty fresh then when he takes command, is what you're saying?
Yeah, but what we find is that Lee's staff stays with him. So even when we think about the experience of the Army coming into the Battle of Gettysburg, if you look at corps commanders, like how many campaigns have they been in? Well, if you look at the Army of Potomac, it's less than one campaign per corps commander. I mean, listen, you got Slocum and Reynolds, they've been in 2 campaigns, but You got Hancock and Sykes. They've been in 0 campaigns as a corps commander.
As corps commanders, right? Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Robert E. Lee, it's the same for his commanders, of course. He's got about, on average, 2, but let's face it, Longstreet has 4 and Jeb Stuart has 4 and Hill and Ewell have 0. So it's unbalanced. Where the real institutional knowledge of the Army is in the staff officers. So Lee, if you look at his staff officers, they've averaged a little over 3 campaigns worth of experience. Meade's have 2.75 worth of campaigns. They've moved the armies across Virginia and back. The institutional knowledge of how to fight an army is in the staff.
So it's like a bureaucrat versus an elected official.
Almost.
Right? Like the elected officials new, and they have a certain term that they're there, but their staffs or the bureaucrats in the different agencies, they've been there for a career.
Yeah.
So they know how it all works.
They do. They have insight into how this works, where the bodies are buried. We get to July 2nd in the morning when Hunt kind of reveals, oh yeah, I've got enough ammunition for everybody, right? That's the ghost train. Because it's not the first time a commanding officer goes, oh my gosh, we don't have any artillery ammunition. And Hunt has had that question before and goes, I'm never going to let that happen to me again. Right? So then he's squirreling away wagons and adding up ammunition. So now he can solve that because he's been down that road before.
Yeah. So there are, before the show, Mike mentioned Humphreys, right? Goes from field command to staff. Is that common?
It is, but not entirely without precedent. One of the things we often talk about, and historians do this hand wave about the Civil War all the time, like, oh, staff work isn't developed nearly as good during the Civil War. Yes, but, all these guys at some point went and served in the Bureau before the war. If you take like 1836 to 1848, anywhere from 20 to 36% of the Army is serving in bureaus. Even if we look at historic figures that we take Ulysses S. Grant, he's a lieutenant in Mexico. Yeah, but he's also their quartermaster of the regiment. So he's done staff-like work. Okay. If you look at internal improvement, when Meade's building lighthouses, yeah, he's not in command, but he's thinking ahead, anticipating, making plans, commanding people that he doesn't know, ordering things, carrying supplies, executing a timeline to finish a task for which he's been assigned. It looks like a lot like being a commanding officer and commanding a staff.
Yeah, okay. Well, and also I would imagine if you are a field commander, you know what you need and you know when you've been disserved or misserved as a commander by your own staff. Like you know, to be a good first fiddle, sometimes you have to be a good second fiddle.
There it is.
Yeah. And so you have to be able to anticipate. I'm sorry, but that's actually reverse of what I was trying to say there. So like in Humphrey's case, he was first fiddle-ish, right? He was in command of a division. And so now he's going to serve the Army commander. So he knows, as having been a commander, the things that a commander needs and how you could be blindsided by somebody's ineptitude or incompetence.
Yeah, sure. And the idea that he's good friends with George Gordon Meade because he was his former corps commander when he was a division commander. They have a relationship.
That helps too.
Yeah. And he's an engineer, so he thinks about things very systematically. So he's a logical choice, a guy that I trust, a guy who thinks, well, all I need somebody to do as a chief of staff is run this lash up of all this other talent.
Yeah. In the movie Gettysburg, we see Lee and Taylor, and Taylor's working on something and Lee's in there. And I don't remember if it's right before Trimble or Stewart comes in. I know there's scenes with them. But it's just the two of them. Now, is that... In that particular thing, I have a feeling that was just kind of Hollywood, right? But I mean, would that have been the thing where just this one guy is doing all this work?
Yeah. So this is also it's an interesting observation. So it's one of the things the movie actually gets right.
Oh, it is,
because we have this really fascinating snapshot. We have a great account of what the Army of the Potomac headquarters are as they advance north. Right. It talks about this as a small city made up of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. Mm-hmm. And then Fitzgerald Ross talks about coming across Meade's headquarters outside of Messersmith's Woods on the Chambers Gettysburg Pike and says it's
Lee's headquarters.
Lee's headquarters, excuse me. It's a half dozen tents with a half dozen baggage wagons. Why? Because Lee doesn't travel with his broader staff. He travels with about 6 close people who he basically interchanges their roles. So yeah, Chilton's his chief of staff, and Walton is his adjutant, and Venables his aide. But whatever he needs done, that's what they do.
Right.
So it is a very small staff. It's a small headquarters.
So you said that he doesn't travel with the full headquarters, but I don't get why.
Yeah,
why wouldn't you?
Okay, so now you can think about, hey, what's the two? Here's the 2 designs of the staff. Meade keeps his right around him because it's centralized control and then decentralized execution. Lee's like, well, I assume Lafayette Guild, you're out doing medical stuff. I don't need you at my headquarters. I assume my quartermaster, Corley, you're out there doing quartermaster stuff.
So basically, he looks at them as like commanders, like non-combat commanders.
Out there doing the things that need to be done. But the dilemma is, certainly for Lee in command, is whenever something comes into Meade during a battle, and there's like, hey, I think we need more ammunition. Meade can turn around and go, hey, Captain Flagler.
Right.
Somebody takes it. For Meade, if anything comes in and he goes, oh, that's a comment, like, hey, write it down. We need to talk to that guy or we got to send a message or a note. Like, none of those get taken off his plate immediately because they're not there to answer the mail on those specific things.
No wonder Lee looks so old. Jeez, I mean, that's a lot of work.
Doug, do you think that the way he treats his, I'm just going to say his commanders, and not necessarily directly correlate to staff, but do you think he has a thing with trusting people where he trusts less people? I mean, we see commanders when they fall out of favor with Lee, he quickly gets rid of them. Do you think keeping that close-knit group of people, they're people that he can trust, that allows him to micromanage instead of too many people?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good one. So I think that you're right about the trust people. And when he has a small staff, it's efficient and he trusts them. And so he can use them however he wants. And that allows for this effective use of ad-hocery to solve any problem on any battlefield. On the other side, the Union, they can't do ad-hocery. I mean, we get beat when we miss details. So we need more structure. It's 2 institutional responses to how these armies have gone down the road.
So you mentioned before, you seem to make a distinction between general staff and personal staff. Yeah. What is it?
So generally, we really talk, there's 2 kinds of field army staffs. First of all, there's general staff, what we think about the national level. In the American Civil War, those are bureaus. They don't have any planning or coordinating mission. They merely supply and run personnel. Okay. It's an American adaptation of the British system.
Okay.
At the field army level, you have special staff officers. These are ones who have special skills. Artillerists, engineers, provost marshals, signal corpsmen, ordnance officers. And then you have what they also call general, but really we should call personal staff. And these are going to be your adjutant general, your judge advocate general, your inspector general, and your aides.
So it's not like somebody who's ironing your clothes for you.
Well, so the only
or
part
that would be an aide.
Normally it used to be those personal staff. Like if you got promoted, they'd all go with you. By this point in the Civil War, that doesn't happen anymore. We need to maintain continuity. Only people who go with you are aides. And even then, it's a mixed bag. Like when Meade becomes the 5th Corps commander to Army of the Potomac commander, he brings 6 aides with him, and the rest he leaves, including his chief of staff, because he knows, who's going to need them? Sykes is going to need them when he becomes the 5th Corps.
Right.
That's continuity for him.
Yes. Okay. That makes great sense. So the staff is attached to the office, not the officer.
That's what we're starting to see.
Yes. And that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, it does.
But in Lee's army, they're not doing that. And I guess like it just sounds to me like the Confederate Army is very much like I don't know what the word is. I feel like I heard somewhere that like if one of the reasons that the batteries were mixed guns was because of like a personal attachment that the men of the battery had to them, and they didn't want to get rid of them for whatever reason. What astounds me is that somebody said, "Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead, you keep." Like it would make it more efficient if you all fired the same ammunition. So sorry, boys, you're in the Army now. Like, no, you can't keep your gun.
So I think you do have institutional culture or personality,
yeah,
where the Army of Northern Virginia is okay with ad hoc. They're okay with you got two range guns or 2 rifle pieces and 2 smoothbores. Well, great. You're good in close or at range. That makes you really flexible. And the Union Army goes,
there's an argument for that, yeah.
And the Union Army goes, no.
Right.
It's all about logistics, right? This is starting to be industrialized warfare. Yeah. How do we go ahead and become more efficient and in that efficiency achieve effectiveness? And they've gone down the different path. You guys are all going to be uniformly armed, period.
Yeah. So, it really is, the Civil War is really the transition from the old world to the new world. Like it just, everything that we take for granted today seems to have been invented during the Civil War, or at least perfected.
Yeah, we start to see all these trends. The growth of staffs. We didn't need them before. The battlefield was small, armies relatively small. I mean, there were bits and pieces, and we know, Napoleon, we can look at Berthier and a bunch of other his staff officers because he's running these campaigns. But what we see is the growth of warfare, the speed, the ranges. Think about it, just when the armies move north, like 10 counties, 3 states, 100,000 men. Hey, that requires more than a single guy doing paperwork at night. So we see this trend that it's only going to continue as it goes into the 20th century. And as we look at 20th century armies, they look a lot more like the Army of Potomac in 1863 than they do like Lee's army.
So I'm Hancock, and I have to send a message to headquarters for whatever. Doesn't matter. Do I have to know who the staff officer is who's going to handle that and address it to him, or do I address it to Meade? He sees it and then hands it off.
Yeah, this is a good question. So we actually have an example. When Hancock arrives up at Cemetery Hill, his job is to assess whether this is a good place to have a battle or not. So he's going to send back Major Mitchell. It's his senior aide. It means he carries the most rank. He's probably the most trusted. He's going to be the one. He just left Tawnytown. He knows where it is. He knows where to go find Lee or Meade. Meade knows that Hancock was sent up for this. So when Mitchell shows up, he goes, well, here comes a 2nd Corps aide that now he's carrying this. And then it'll be followed by Isaac Parker, captain. So you figure Hancock's second trusted. Well, we don't know if Mitchell's going to make it or not, so we better send a second guy.
Right.
So part of it is, and we see this even, some of this gets to be the art of command, right? If we're familiar with the expression, it's sometimes it's not the message, but the messenger that counts. Why does Reynolds send Stephen Weld on day 1? Stephen Weld is the newest guy on his staff. He's only been on Reynolds' staff for a week. Yeah, but Weld was also the division aide when he and Meade were brigade commanders in the Pennsylvania Reserve Division.
So Meade would know him.
He's known him for the last year and a half. It's a trusted face, long way from Reynolds. What's he doing here? I know whatever you tell me is going to be the guy who knows the truth. So this is how you use your talent, even at that level, at the rate of an aide.
And it reminds me of an example in the Confederate Army when Pettigrew is reporting back to Heath, and then Hill shows up. And Heath and Hill are like, nah. And they pull over one of Pettigrew's guys who used to work as a staff officer, I believe, under Hill.
Yeah, Johnson.
Yeah, and you would think Hill would maybe then say, oh, well, okay. But no, he doesn't.
And your heart wrenches for Pettigrew. You're like, well, I'm new to the organization. Nobody trusts me. It's not my day. So he tries to make an appeal to authority. Here's a kid you know.
Yeah. And it doesn't work.
No.
So I guess my point there is that while the thinking is good, if the recipient of the familiar face is, for whatever reason, unwilling to listen, it's moot. But it makes sense that you would do that anyway.
Yeah. So it's again, now we get to the point that, an aide's an extension of a commander's voice because he can't go all the way back to Tawnytown, but the aide can.
And this is another thing I always wondered too. Does a staff officer, if I'm Meade and I send a staff officer, or I'm Lee, I'm send a staff officer to, Longstreet or Sickles or whoever, and I tell him, order him to, bring his reserves all in, or whatever.
Yeah.
Does that staff officer, okay, he delivers the order. Anything beyond that, though, right? Any conversation, any questions, anything like that. Does the staff officer have the authority to give permission to a field commander to do something in the interest of, well, we're in the middle of an emergency situation here. I don't have time to go back to headquarters and get the answer. Like, are they given that leeway, or does that depend on the commander?
Yeah, so this is a big fat depends.
Okay.
So it depends. The aides...
Like this. Sorry. That's from Grant in Australia.
The aides carry the rank of the commander when they carry his message. So when he says, hey, go in. Now, if you go, why? Part of his aide's responsibility is to know why.
Yeah, of course.
Because that's why you're hanging around the headquarters. You're watching all these messages come and go. You should know. This is part of your responsibility as aide. Everybody just thinks around these guys are smoking and joking until somebody goes, hey, Cowrie, we need you to take a message. No. You're engaged this whole time because your responsibility is go, because here's what's going on around this. And we find when this breaks down, Meade sends his son to tell Sickles to be in position. And his first response is, oh, I don't actually know where you're supposed to be. Right? Because when Sickles goes, I don't quite understand. The division that was up on Little Round Top has already left. Where do you want me to be? Well, he's only been an aide for a couple days since Meade took command.
Okay.
So now he's got to go back because he didn't know the job. Now, there's other guys. If we think about Joseph Dickinson's the senior aide of the Army of the Potomac, Meade inherits him when he becomes the commander. So he was already Hooker's aide. He's good at it. He's a lieutenant colonel. So think about when he comes north and he talks to Reynolds down at Moritz's Tavern for about 20 minutes on the evening of the 30th of June. And then he continues north and he goes meets with Buford at the Eagle Hotel for about 2 hours. Think about all the things. This is why I find this whole discussion about, Reynolds is making the decision on his own. He has no context. He doesn't have the Pipe Creek order. Yeah, he does. Because Dickinson talked to him for the last 20 minutes saying, here's what we've been doing all day. Hunt was out there looking at the line. We got this backup plan in case it all goes bad. So just so you know, that's back behind. He's past the word. He has way more WASTA to expand the limits of his responsibility rather than just giving here specifically what the boss wants you
What'd you say? Way more what?
WASTA.
What is WASTA?
WASTA is in Pashtun Wali. This is your standing, your chisba, how much you can spend, how much
capital,
social capital you have.
Okay.
It's not tied to rank, but you've been doing the job a long time. You're experienced. I know your role. I know what you do. You understand, and therefore you have wider room to maneuver.
Okay. So, but let's go back to that scene at the Moritz Tavern, though, and let's break this down because you're right. Everybody always says, "Well, he didn't know," but all right, he didn't have it in writing because
it's not written yet.
It's not written yet, right? It's okay. But he's told this verbally. How do we know this? Who says this? Who says that he was told it by the aide? I forget the name. You said that
Joseph Dickinson.
Dickinson, thank you. So, are you speculating here, or do you?
No.
Do we know that he?
We have an account.
So we have an account that says that the idea behind what would be the Pipe Creek Circular was communicated to Reynolds verbally.
This is a great question. So I am surmising because we know he meets with Reynolds for 20 minutes.
Okay.
We don't know necessarily what he told him.
Okay.
But if you're Reynolds and you haven't gotten the orders for the next day, what do you ask him?
What are my orders for tomorrow?
Yeah, and what's
Any
going
idea
on
what
back
they want
there?
me to do tomorrow?
Hey, here's all the things. This is what the boss has been thinking about. Here's the orders been coming in. Here's his idea of what might happen. We are looking at this branch plan. You can imagine he's just given the entire brain dump because he spent the whole day at the Army of the Potomac headquarters walking around with the boss.
Right.
And now when he goes up there, if you're a corps commander, you're going to go ahead and try and figure out everything you can.
Now, so Dickinson is an aide.
He is.
Which is different than a staff officer.
They're still aides or considered staff officers.
Okay, but they're more. What is his duty?
Yeah, so it's a wide open responsibility.
So he's a wild card. It could be whatever.
Yeah, he's a gopher. Go for this, go for that, go take this information, go find this out, go take a look at the top of that hill, go talk to that commander, find me this piece of information. And it's why when Meade gets here, what he does is he assigns an aide from the Army of Potomac to every corps headquarters, and it's a circular that says then every corps should send somebody to the headquarters so they know where it is. Meade's trying to accelerate his speed of decision and action once this whole thing gets going. He's anticipating the next day.
The Gettysburg Museum of History, located right here in the center of Gettysburg, PA. Owner and curator Eric Dorr grew up here and has spent his life collecting and preserving history through artifacts ranging from the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, World War II, presidential items, pop culture, and more. His museum is free and open to visitors Wednesday through Sunday, 11 to 5 p.m., where you can stop by and immerse yourself in some of the most amazing artifacts that you would never believe exist in the middle of Gettysburg. If you're a fan of Band of Brothers and everything Everything Easy Company, you'll love his exhibit featuring the Dick Winters collection and artifacts from D-Day. You can even own your own piece of history by buying one of the many relics they have for sale in the museum and on the website GettysburgMuseumofHistory.com. The Gettysburg Museum of History is a non-profit 501c3 organization with a foundation that allows all purchases and donations to keep the museum operating and open free of charge. They have been featured on the History Channel, the Travel Channel, the Smithsonian Channel, and the Science Channel. Now you can check them out on American Artifact, the series on the YouTube channel, The History Underground. So that's the Gettysburg Museum of History at 219 Baltimore Street or the GettysburgMuseumofHistory.com.
When you're dragging ass out of bed and the hair's mussed up on your head, you picture the 20th Maine and you're happy once again. Fight the battle against being slow with Little Ground Top, bro.
When you're dragging ass out of bed, the hair's mussed up on your head. You picture the 20th Maine, and you're happy once again. Fight the battle against being slow with Little Ground Top Bro.
Addressing Gettysburg's Little Ground Top by Bantam Roasters is available at 82 Steinway Avenue in Gettysburg or at addressinggettysburg.com/cafe.
All right. Hey, did you know, girls, Colby, everybody, that there are almost 300 audio shows and almost 100 video shows on our Patreon page?
That's pretty awesome.
Did you know that several respectable licensed battlefield guides are patrons?
Wow.
But they've asked to remain nameless so as to not ruin their reputation.
That's not true.
Are they embarrassed by you?
Yes, that's the point.
They're not. That's not true.
It's true. Just
No.
ask Ralph or
was
Rob or
Charlie.
Jason. Patreon now allows, or Lewis, I won't say their last names. Patreon now allows you, ladies and gentlemen, to have a 7-day free trial. Now, I could choose whatever level I wanted. I could have chosen the level where you get the least amount of perks, but I said no. I'm going to give them the best value level, which would be the second lieutenant, because you get all of the audio shows for the month. So you get that for 7 days, 7-day free trial. Might go away for a while. I'll bring it back and I'll go away, bring it back. But right now it's there. If you're not sure that you want to join. And it also allows you to purchase individual episodes. This is a new thing that they've allowed. Now I got to go through all the episodes and put them on there. Yeah, and open it up. It's cheaper if you become a monthly member. You can also have annual subscriptions. There's a discount if you do that. And did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that 908 out of 909 college sophomores agree that you can't say you're fully prepared for the guide exam without having consumed all of Addressing Gettysburg's Patreon content? How do you do that? Become a second lieutenant. Guys, these are college sophomores. Okay? They know everything. They know everything. Just watch the news, watch TikTok. They will tell you. That's it. That's it. Go to patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg to become a patron. I was going to say a licensed battlefield guide. That's not what you become if you do that. Become a patron. Addressing Gettysburg. Patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. Do it. Just do it and make Bethany happy, okay? Do it.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Callery.
How about the way the soldiers in the field viewed the staff officers? Did they not like them? Did they have disdain for them, or did they not interact with them too much?
Yeah. So so first of all, everybody likes the paymaster. Nobody's going to hate that guy. So he's okay. But you can imagine too, for everybody who's responsible, mostly all staff officer jobs are break-even jobs. On the best day as the commissariat, you know what happens? everybody eats. If you do your job, it's a break even. It's when you don't do your job that then all of a sudden things start to break down.
That's when I have a feeling.
This is what's being on a staff every day is like, if I do everything perfectly, it should go the way it's supposed to go.
Right. Okay.
So there is this, but they do interact, and it's actually quite amazing how well they do this. I talk about Henry Clark. Like, have you ever looked at how many times that they issue 3 days rations right before they go into battle?
Seems like every time.
Yeah, but it looks pretty doggone close to the next day they go into a fight.
Yeah.
That's because the commissary officer's going like, hey, we ought to issue the rations. We got to get the wagons out of the way. But they imagine when you do that with the Army of the Potomac, 93,000 men, 270,000 rations. That's no small affair.
No.
So to manage that at scale takes talent.
Well, yeah. And so now you kind of bring up logistics. So that's the thing that just fascinates me is keeping these armies in the field, moving them around, keeping them fed, keeping the horses fed, keeping the mules fed. It's such an undertaking just to go a mile, right, with all this stuff. And these guys are going dozens of miles, sometimes in a full day. So these guys, the staff officers, this is like, if there's anything that they have to do, this is it.
This is
right?
what we do.
This is what we do. You guys keep the army moving.
We look down and in. George Gordon Meade, you know what you do? Figure out how we're going to beat Robert E. Lee. You want to move the army? Just tell us where you want them to go.
Yeah.
We'll feed them. We'll give them ammunition. We'll keep shoes on their feet. We'll make sure the horses are fed. We'll do all that. You just think about how you want to beat Robert E. Lee.
See, this is why I play the lottery, so that I could pay people like Mike to be like staff officers to me and to let me worry about a show.
Yeah, every day
you worry about the
you
bullshit.
put me back here, Doug.
What?
There's no glory in it, and if I do nothing wrong, it goes okay, and I get no accolade.
You are officially a staff officer.
Yeah, without the without the commission. Yeah, someday, Mikey, someday. So was being chosen to be a staff officer or an aide, was that considered a stepping stone to a command?
So you would argue for the same reason that Humphreys does not want to be chief of staff, because he wants to be a line commander. You didn't join the army to be a staff officer.
Right.
You joined the army to lead men in battle, to lead artillery, to lead cav. You did that stuff. I don't say that staff officers become secondary positions, but even in modern parlance, I mean, think about Patton's comments about staff. Oh, they're miserable people, right? We don't like staff officers because they're not making command decisions and they're not at the front line. And that's what we consider to be service. Staff officers are the sinew in between.
Yeah, they're like,
who wants to be the sinew in between?
Not me.
Right.
No, yeah, that's boring.
So you still have this battle between what it is to be a line officer, a frontline commander, and what it is to be a staff officer. But if you serve long enough, you ought to do both and know how they work. Which is interesting because Meade's been a staff officer for two different armies. He served both Taylor and Scott in Mexico. We normally think about Lee as the engineer for Winfield Scott, but Meade actually got two different reps. He got to see a bunch of reps. How's Tyler command an army? Interesting. How's Scott command an army? Interesting.
So that is okay. That is interesting because he was right there up close and personal watching Army commanders command. And granted, it was a while ago and a lot has changed since then, but you still saw, like, there's certain things that are timeless, right?
Yeah.
So you're gonna take those in or remember them when something comes up in your own situation. But you said something earlier about how, people say, Heath never commanded a division before, or Hill never commanded a corps before, or something like that. And you're like, well, nobody did. And it just dawned on me, like, from the beginning of the war, nobody commanded what they commanded before. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, a division commander or whatever.
It's true. I mean, we have 4 octogenarians as general officers in the United States Army before the war starts. 2 of them have commanded more than 10,000 men. That's it. Everybody else has been, and Ewell so much said so, right? Everything I learned about command, I learned by commanding 50 dragoons on the frontier.
Yeah.
Right, because he was a company commander. What did they train at West Point? Company commanders, because you're going to be a lieutenant. I mean, I ask the question all the time. What was something you learned your senior year in college that you apply every day? For the 9 classes.
The afternoon nap.
But for the 9 classes they got on advanced strategy at West Point as a lieutenant, and now they're a major general commanded 90,000 men. You're kidding me.
Yeah.
This is all new.
Right.
They're all learning as they go. And it's actually amazing that they make the progress that they make in the time that they make.
That's what I'm saying. I'm more impressed with these people the more I learn this stuff about them, and I make these realizations that, like, they're inventing it as it goes. That's crazy. Like, that's...
Yeah, so this is why I think it's really important when we look back at these touchstones of like, hey, these pre-war Army guys, like they're serving in the bureaus. Oh, they got an idea what staff work. Oh, they're doing internal improvements. That looks a lot like staff work. Oh, they've been looking at European doctrine and Americanizing it. Oh, that's a pretty good idea. Oh, they've been looking at the Crimean War. Oh, so they're stealing these lessons. They're becoming more professional. They're at the Napoleon Club at West Point. Oh, Napoleon did this. Well, they had to talk about logistics for that. Oh, Frederick the Great did that. Oh, there's a little logistics. So they have these minor touchstones. So staff work is not an utterly new thing. They have these insights, but it's the application of it at scale that happens in the Civil War.
Now, you made me think, are staff officers on the whole regular Army people, or are they volunteers, or are they mixes?
Mixes. Mm-hmm. And it depends really what level. For all the guys that are on Meade staff, they're regular officers. That's why these guys become, Seth Williams is Robert E. Lee's adjutant at West Point because he's been doing this for a long time.
Okay.
He's a regular officer. But if you think about it, when we talk about the whole notion of wagons get off the road so that infantry, artillery, ambulances, and ammunition go forward, empty wagons go back, full wagons go forward. Rufus Ingalls talks about, look, we've trained everybody in the Army all the way down to the lowest level. This is a system. Today, we would call this doctrine, right? We have a system on how we manage it. Everybody knows this. We've trained these guys. The guys at the lowest level, they're volunteers.
So now in the Confederate Army, we're talking logistics and everything in the Union Army. Confederate Army, is Lee's staff basically responsible for the same thing, or is it kind of different because it's not such a big staff?
Actually, you can match up almost position by position. Here's the guy that is doing that responsibility in Lee's staff. The question is he good at it? And is he around all the time? And I think oftentimes those things break down.
You ask, is he around all the time? Is he around to do it all the time? Is that because they wore more than one hat?
Well, so some of it is, we take it for example, here we use all the time, Jeb Stuart's not here for 8 days, including the first 2 days of the battle. Okay. Well, then the cav guy on Lee's staff, wait a minute. He didn't have a guy on Lee's staff that is responsible for cavalry because he didn't have a cavalry staff officer. So if anybody's going to think about the intel gathering problem for the Army of Northern Virginia, it's Robert E. Lee because he doesn't have a guy. Yeah. The guy is out riding around the Union Army. So nobody's going to come up with the idea, any creative idea of like, take those batteries horses. We're going to get 100 guys. And at least we have 100 guys out there so that after Samuel Johnson does his reconnaissance in the morning and he comes back, we got a way to get Longstreet's corps in position without having to make countermarches because all the guys standing at that crossroads, those would be cavalry officers. All the guys that would be sitting there watching the peach orchard before the 3rd Corps marches out and Lafayette McLaw's like, oh my gosh, how did they get there? Well, who's responsible for monitoring the city? Well, that would be cavalry.
Okay.
But if nobody's there to think about how do we solve these extra, once Lee goes ad-hocery, I can get reconnaissance, but how do I do all those other cavalry tasks?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to, it would have to be him to think of it.
So how does that compare or contrast to other theaters like Bragg's Army? How does that structure of Lee's staff and how he organizes things? And on the other side, same with Meade's Army. Are there similarities or differences in other theaters?
It's interesting. Grant's staff is also really good. He comes up with alternative intelligence sources. They're all collectively learning. This is the changing character of war. They're recognizing this. I think the Confederate side tends to follow the Confederate side more or less with this idea of how many of your personal family members are on your staff, right? So this is, I think the last statistic I saw was half of all Confederate generals had at least one member of their family on their staff.
Really?
Yeah.
So, Mike, I had a good question. What were we talking right before Mike asked his question and ruined the entire show?
I think we were starting to talk about the ad-hocery of the Army of Northern Virginia.
Yeah,
and we were talking about the cavalry and the countermarch.
Cavalry, right. So Lee, I know this isn't a show about cavalry and Stuart and all that stuff, but Lee does have cavalry within arm's reach. He doesn't have Stuart. And I know that the big thing is that it's not that he's lacking cavalry, it's that he's lacking Stuart to take in and analyze and report this information, all the intelligence that they're getting. In Stuart's absence, nobody on his staff this is just a couple part question. Nobody in his staff is able to do that like Stuart did, number one. Number two, why do you think Lee didn't grab some of the cavalry at his disposal?
Yeah, first of all, it's a good question, but it partly goes to his staff. It's a small staff. They help him run the Army. He doesn't have a specialist at his headquarters to work cav issues. So we take all the time today about how we're swimming in sensors and drowning in data. Imagine a Civil War campaign where Stuart's got 10,000 cavalrymen during this campaign. Everybody's riding down some back farm alley or something. They're sending back a note, right?
Right.
And it's Stuart that goes, useless, useless, useless. Ooh, that one's important. Right? He's the one who's turning raw data into intelligence. And when he does his job, Robert E. Lee has won 4 campaigns. He's never lost, and he's tied once.
Right.
So when he does that, and it's almost like his whole cav is in one guy. Now, as for his other people, well, you can almost start to break it down. So Imboden and Jenkins are irregular cavalry that aren't used to serving with the Army of Northern Virginia. Remember, they get plussed up for this campaign. Well, arguably, and we can argue this certainly over a beer, of whether or not they can do the complex screening and intelligence gathering that Lee needs. Mm-hmm. And so what he arguably does is talent manage, and he goes, well, Jenkins, why don't you go with Ewell and lead the invasion north, because you won't run into any Union cavalry, because you'll be at the leading edge of the invasion. John Imboden, I know you're out in West Virginia. You guys are horse thieves. This will be really good. Why don't you guys send 30,000 cows and 20,000 sheep, and why don't you go do that?
Yeah.
Because now I can use that. But then you still go, okay, well, we got Beverly Robertson. Mm-hmm. Okay, Beverly Robertson. And we go, well, he's an old regular. Like, he could do this job. Yeah, okay, D.H. Hill won't give up 2 brigades of Pickett's division for this invasion. But he gives up Beverly Robertson. Why? Because his 3 regiments are totally green. They're not good at their job. And so they get a basic task. And, oh, by the way, Beverly Robertson was once engaged to Jeb Stuart's wife. And so they don't get along. So now you got personal problems there. And then the last guy you have is Grumble Jones. Now, if your nickname's Grumble, what do you think your interpersonal skills are like, right?
Yeah. Nobody likes you.
But the problem is, and at least this is my calculus, and some of the cavalry experts on this can weigh in and fix my math. But as I do this, if Lee was going to tap into Beverly Robertson and Grumble Jones as they sat down there in Maryland watching the passes, on the day Jeb Stuart started his ride, 25th of June, Lee would have had to go, you guys leave the passes, come north.
Right. Well, but okay.
Because they're going to show, by the time he realizes it and they get up here, remember, it's the 3rd.
Sure. I know. I understand. I understand that. And from the intelligence point of view, I understand why he didn't do what he did or what we're talking about. But before you had mentioned, when Longstreet's moving, there would have been a cavalry officer at each spot, and then there would have been somebody observing the Union line and everything like that. Why, for that purposes, didn't he at least detach a battalion or a couple of companies? Just like, you know what I mean? Like, why not for the and then also, does he have a headquarters guard? Is there a headquarters, like a unit, like Lee's or Meade's got that?
Yeah.
Does Lee?
Yeah, he does. And again, the idea of like, as we think back and look back in history, we're like, well, why didn't they use those guys? Like, why don't we take, but again, this would be Lee of like, hey, we're going to cut you guys loose to go out and do this. And that would be a good, seemingly, a good use of them. Mm-hmm. But again, that's a novel ad hoc. We don't normally do that. Who's going to guard the headquarters? So now something else isn't getting done. So it would require a fair amount of creative thought.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And also, Lee didn't know what we know.
Well, that's just it. Because what you'd like to say is, oh, he doesn't let him go. And I mean, even the idea of feeling their way forward, no cav and all, they'd be like, yeah, I got you.
Yeah. Huh. All right, so tell us some other stuff about staffs and staff work and something that you find interesting that we might not know.
Well, so, I mean, even when we think about when Meade arrives, here at Gettysburg, right? We talk about, oh, hey, he asked all his generals, what do you think we should do? They all assure him it's a good place to fight. And he says, yeah, the whole army's coming here. So then he's going to ride his lines that night. But if you look at who he rides with, it's kind of interesting. We talk about diversity of thought as a good way to solve complex problems. So when he rides his lines, he rides with Howard, infantry commander. Mm-hmm. He rides with Hunt, artillery commander. They don't see the battlefield the same way. And then he rides with William Payne, an engineer who apparently has the novel skill of being able to draw maps on the pommel of his horse. Right? So
Not easy.
not easy. But he brings this kid with him in part because now you think about I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 corps here or within reach. Everybody else is going to show up on the field. They're going to take these positions. Am I going to explain to everybody who arrives where they go? Well, that'd be great for the 40%, audible learners. But he draws a map for the 40% visual learner. Like, I've got to convey a lot of information really quick. He's trying to think of, how do I use all the means at my disposal to build a common operational picture? So he brings a guy who knows how to draw a map so that when everybody shows up on the field and goes, boss, where should I go? They go, okay, here's what we're doing. Fish hook shaped line. This is going to extend high ground. Here's a map. And now all of a sudden he's able to use what is a staff officer in his command to go ahead and build situational awareness so everybody knows what's going on.
What a luxury, right? Yeah.
Well, so now you're even talking about staff work at scale. The pre-war Army has, I think, 97 engineering officers. And altogether, I think another 97 enlisted engineers.
Okay.
We only got 16,000 men in our Army. So, but if you think about where we are by 1863, they're now engineering brigades. So when we think about Vincent arrives up at Little Round Top with 5 minutes to spare. Yeah, the 5 minutes started when the Corps of Engineers built a 1,250-foot pontoon bridge over the Potomac River, and they did that in 3 hours. The next one they built at night in the rain. It took them 9, but the whole Army crossed the Potomac River in 45 hours or 65 hours between the 24th and 27th. The entire Army crosses the Potomac River. That's operational mobility created because you took a staff function and you developed it at scale, and now all of a sudden you can pick up the tempo and speed with which an Army can move. There's your 5 minutes at Little Round Top. It actually started down at the Potomac River.
Wow. Yeah, when you put it that way, it's so impressive to me. I can't get it. And I know, I think it's the arrogance of man to, think that people before you weren't as smart as you are. And not me individually, I mean your generation. And but in many ways they were probably smarter because they actually we live a virtual life more and more every day. They lived real life. They knew a lot of things from experiencing things. And they were trained, maybe not everybody, obviously not everybody, but it seems like that at least people in this area were trained better than the average Joe today. And so you knew how to think. Now we teach you what to think. Then they taught you how to think. And so you could solve these problems and you could figure them out, and you could learn a job or create a job on the fly because you had the mental muscle to do it. Or enough people did. Not everybody, of course. There's always an idiot, but not everybody. But enough people did, and they can set the example for others. And so I always feel bad when I'm surprised that these people were intelligent, but of course they were. They invented the world that we in the United States at least live in now.
Yeah, I'm in violent agreement with you in the sense that they are wickedly practical problem solvers. And in part because war is a very tough school. And when things don't go right, it's paid for in lives.
Well, okay, so you're a colonel in the Marines, right? So what is different with staff work and staffs today? I mean, I'm imagining a staff is probably 5,000 men now as opposed to, a couple dozen.
Yeah, so it depends what level. I mean, if I served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so that's 1,500 people. So now, granted, it's a senior person in the United States. We have global responsibilities all around the world.
Right.
Technically speaking, staff work hasn't changed at all, with the exceptions of the commander is now no longer its own intelligence officer because we have an intelligence branch that does that. And he's no longer his operations officer. In fact, arguably, you have a future operations officer and what we would call the J5, and then you have an operations officer, your J3. Somebody who's doing current ops, somebody who's thinking ahead of what that looks like. But everything else, extension of the commander's eyes, expanding his thinking about options, taking mundane tasks off of his responsibility, because the commander has responsibilities that belong to him and him alone. Everybody else is doing the job to try and make that job either better informed or easier.
1,500. That's crazy. That's a lot.
Well,
but I mean, it makes sense of why. But it's just that's
24/7 global, actually intergalactic operation at this point.
Oh, right, because we have Space Force or whatever we call it now.
Yeah.
What is it? Is it Space Force?
Space
yeah.
Force.
Okay, that doesn't sound right, but
So there you go. But they even think about where we were 20 years ago.
right.
So you go, well, changing character of war. Do we need to add expertise? Yeah, you got to add a cyber guy. Oh yeah, commander to know anything about cyber. How about space guy? Yeah, we better get a space guy.
Right.
Now you're expanding the number of technical experts that you need because the boss came from, he was a tanker or a pilot or a ship driver or whatever, but he didn't know about that. I need a guy, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
Therefore, you found and created a staff position so that you could inform advances thinking about that technical piece of expertise.
So what did you do when you were a staff officer on the Joint Chiefs?
So when I was on the Joint Chiefs, I worked in the J8 for a while. So which is really, we do wargaming to figure out what future requirements are. And then I was also responsible for figuring out what the out years ammunition requirements were for all the services. So not this year that they were buying or next year, but for the next 3 years, collectively, what do the services need of ammunition?
Wow. How do you figure that?
Yeah, so there used to be an old guy and he had a model, and apparently the model was really expensive and they fired the guy. So when I showed up, they're like, hey, figure that out. So I ultimately came up with a ungodly set of Excel spreadsheets, and I hired a guy to help me run it. And I used wargaming, I used plans, operational plans, and then I talked to combatant commanders, and I developed 2 sets of numbers, and then I took a combination of the two.
Now, when you say wargaming, you're talking like you played Sid Meier's Gettysburg, or like what do you? How does that work? I've always heard that, but like, what do they actually do when they wargame?
Wargamings are extensive. They can do everything from like tabletop games of like, let's just get senior commanders and let's talk about kind of theoretically, how do we want to approach whatever. The defense of Taiwan. Okay, big one. And then you go, no. Let's actually figure out, we talk about future analytic baselines, which say, how do we figure out future force requirements for in a stressing scenario? So Taiwan's a good one to stress the Air Force and the Navy. So what you'll do is you'll run a series of war game, everything from the logistics to the air sorties flown to the ships needed to move stuff and all that. And they'll plug data in, and then they'll hit run. It'll run like 60,000 iterations of the game. And then they come out with some ideas, and then you go, hey, is that a good idea? And then you share that with them. Oh, okay. And it's one of the things that helps us figure out what our future force requirements are. So we use them for that, but it happens in every bit of, it is a step in planning, our planning process.
Yeah.
Is once you come up with different courses of action, then to war game them and go, well, this is good at this, and that's good at that, and that's strong at this, it's kind of weak at this. Well, we could take parts of this and parts of that. It's how you can help commanders choose what course of action to pursue. So I did that, and then I also worked for the Chairman's Action Group, which the job was just to inform the advanced thinking of the chairman. So it was just, you were excess brain power for the boss.
So then you, what's that old saying? No plan survives contact with the enemy.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Well, I mean, I've never been in the service or in combat, but I can tell you in life, if you consider everybody but you and your team the enemy, yeah, that's not mostly, but it is often true. Sure.
Yes. So,
but that doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, though.
No, right. But it bends both ways, I think. I always like to push back on it because you're right. You're going to have to inherently, what we talk about is we need to learn from the past, anticipate the future. You'll always get it wrong. And then you'll have to adapt to the current. So if your plan doesn't survive first contact with the enemy, your plan sucks.
It's a bad plan. No contingency plan.
You should have considered that we might run into the enemy.
Sure.
So I would argue that it has to be a bend. And this is what we talk about even in command, right? You have to be flexible of mind enough that you are not indecisive. And you must be determined enough, but not so that you are so rigid that you can't change. There's a tension in there, and it has to be.
So what would you say Lee's plan for the Gettysburg or the Pennsylvania campaign, did it suck?
No.
It was a good one.
I think it was based on the conditions that they faced as a Confederacy, that it was maybe the best that they could have come up with what they had at the time.
Would you say it was desperate?
Desperate, that becomes an interesting, because that's pretty qualitative.
Yeah.
His numerical odds are never going to be better than this.
Right.
He's got a lot of momentum. The Union Army is in flux. Every corps has been just impacted by this new reorganization. They got a new commander who's only been in charge for 3 days when this whole thing starts. If you have an army that you can consistently beat, but they normally slide back across the Rappahannock River in the defenses of Washington, luring them in the open, that you might annihilate them in one climactic battle and use that as a mechanism to collapse Union will, that's a pretty good theory of victory in light of, I can't get to independence diplomatically, economically, or informationally. So you're kind of down to this. And maybe that makes it desperate.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds desperate. And also they're trying to get food and other supplies.
Yeah, so I will agree with you that this has aspects of a raid, but he didn't come up here to get supplies.
No, he had loftier goals, but that was certainly part of it.
I agree. The winter of 62-63 is miserable, without a doubt.
But then he seems to be taken by surprise by the battle. But the enemy is closer than he thought.
Okay, so now let's flip the script.
Yeah.
Lee's surprised because all of a sudden, well, first of all, he doesn't have any cab to tell him that people are coming.
Right.
But the other side is, look at Meade, right? Oh man, on the day he takes over, the army's too spread out, right? He has a task, stay between Baltimore and Washington, defensive mission, act as the army of operation, offensive mission. So he's got to balance those two. But he goes, well, first of all, we got to do a better job of protecting the army because when Lee shows up on our flank, we always get creamed. The other thing is we've got to go ahead and start operating faster. We can march as fast as them. We got to increase not only our velocity over space, but the tempo of our operations, how we operate over time. So if you think about it, as they advance north on 5 roads, all within a day's march of one another. That's mutually supporting. That's how they achieve speed and tempo.
Yeah.
I think Lee is surprised to see him. But Meade is constantly looking at this. We've got to decrease baggage. We've got to keep moving. We got to keep, and then he'll always throw in the end of, hey, make sure you take care of your men. But like that's always like the last thing.
Yeah.
Wink, wink, take care of the guy. Right. But look how they move.
Work them to the bone, but make sure you take care of them.
Yeah, but even if you look at the march distances they go, right? It's up to the time he takes over, they're averaging 10 miles a day. He takes over, all of a sudden it's 25, 28 miles a day. Like he's putting screws to Lee because he's getting inside of his decision loop. Lee is surprised because the Army of the Potomac moves.
Right. But his plan doesn't seem to have a contingency for that. It seems to be once he finds it out, he goes, oh, okay, here's the contingency. Everybody get back here. Right. But as far as I'm aware, and I'm not deep into this portion of everything, as far as I'm aware, he never says to everybody, you know, if we discover that the enemy is up here, we're all going to run back to Cashtown or Gettysburg. Like that is something that is new to Lee, just as it's new to the people who are going to receive that message, right?
Yeah.
So then did his plan suck?
No, I mean, well, so if we think about why does he come north, is he really about taking Harrisburg? Not really. No. I mean, all it is to threaten a state capital because he wants the Potomac Army to come up and find him.
Mm-hmm.
So he achieves that.
Okay, fair. That's fair. So he just not where he was thinking.
Well, but even if he wags it, right, it's going to be somewhere between Emmitsburg and Hanover.
Yeah.
That's pretty good for 1863 wag. But he doesn't have any cab to figure out where they are. So there's the surprise portion. But then the idea of, well, we'd be better served to fight on the eastern side of the mountain range. And then even look at the first day. You know, we normally bag on Ewell. Oh, he doesn't make the decision at the end of day one, take the high ground if practicable. I don't know, man. He marches 22 miles.
Yeah.
On the 29th or on the 30th so that he can show up on the flank of all Union soldiers there. That looks a lot like Stonewall Jackson.
Sure. I don't blame Ewell for not doing that. I defend him.
I'm just saying that, you
I know.
You look at day one and all of a sudden, and look, he doesn't tell anybody, and this might be his bigger problem, is he never tells anybody. We don't have any evidence that he tells anybody the purpose except what he tells Trimble. Right, I expect as their Union Army will come up probably through Frederick, they'll be strung out and hungry and much demoralized by hard marches. And as they enter into Pennsylvania, they'll throw an overwhelming force against their front, crush one corps and drive back upon another. And through successive repulsive surprise, before they can concentrate, I will create a panic and annihilate the Union Army. Well, that's what he does on day one. He crushes 2 corps. I mean, the 1st Corps never fights as an organized unit again. The 11th Corps gets kludged with the 12th, and they go out and become the 20th. I mean, it's working.
Up until a certain point. And then, then his plan doesn't suck.
But then staff work starts to show, right? As the margins get tighter and tighter. what's the coordination for day 2? Does he ever meet with all of his corps commanders? Do they ever have a common operational picture? Do they ever share a common vision of what he's trying to do? No. And even the little parts that break down, Rhodes and Ewell attacking Cemetery, that's at a corps level. They can coordinate it. When whether we want to call it the echelon attack or Longstreet's attack doesn't continue through Ewell's corps, except for Robert E. Lee would write, except for a proper concert of action, we would have been successful. Who's responsible for concert of action? Lee. And then by extension,
his staff.
There you go.
Yeah. And he doesn't have the staff for it. And he doesn't learn a lesson that maybe I need to get a bigger staff.
So then it becomes interesting because now that he's lost a third of his army and he goes back, they go back to this ad-hocery, and the fact is it kind of works. Once they're on the move, I would argue that one of the reasons that it hurts him here is that the margins get so tight and the numbers get so tight that he doesn't have a lot of things that he can do. But once they start on the move, then all of a sudden, he's got other guys building pontoon bridges. I mean, all of a sudden the ad-hocery works if you're on the move.
Yeah.
But the margins for operating in the old way are shrinking. And we will see this through the end of 64, 65.
Chamberlain, not Lawrence, but the job of being the king's chamberlain back in the old days, where you get to go into the bathroom with him and wipe his ass. People sought that job. They wanted that job because you had the king's ear before you wiped his rear. And I want to know, did the position of being the aide to a general, was that looked at similar to a chamberlain? Now, I know you're not following him into the outhouse, but the fact that you have this proximity to him, you're helping him put a sash on or whatever, and you're talking to this guy, like you're with him all the time. You're probably helping him when he gets sick. So was that something that people really wanted?
Yeah. It's a position of prestige. If you get to carry the commander's rank when you give orders, you're actually tapping into their prestige. They know where you came from. It's really weird to be an aide.
Yeah.
So I was an aide to 2 different 3-stars. You have to recognize people are being nice to you, not because of you. They're being nice to you because of your boss.
Right.
So you have to humbly go about that job. But there's 2 things at play. One, you get to be close to the power. The other side is it's a massive learning opportunity because if you're an aide, you get to watch how a senior commander makes decisions, how they process information, what works, what doesn't, what personalities, how do they interact with them? Are those guys good guys? Is he a good team player? I know what a bad team player. I was all that guy. So you get to learn life lessons, and certainly in the profession of arms, you get to learn a lot about how it is to be a commander, to be an aide.
Today, is there a career path from aide to a general? Or you're learning all these lessons? Is it just trivial, or are you learning them because someday you might become a general?
So if you're really thoughtful about talent management, then you put really good people as aides because you want them to learn, and that accelerates their learning because someday maybe they might be in those same positions, and this is an exposure event that they won't get in any other way except to see it through the lens of somebody else.
See, Mike, that's why I have you back there. I want you to see greatness up close because someday you might be.
In service, when I came off the flight line and then went to debrief, I became the office manager for my CO, and I learned how much he liked perfectly lined vacuum marks when he came in the morning. That's what I learned. That's what I take with me today.
So when you were aide to generals, what did you have to do? What was your rank? Were you a colonel at that point?
I was a major.
Major, okay.
And I was the aide to the deputy commandant for Marine Corps Aviation, so 3-star position responsible for acquiring all of the Marine Corps' aviation assets. One was great, and basically he made me brief every package into his office. So it meant that I had to learn all of Marine Corps aviation. But I had to go in there and go, boss, here's what this is about. Here's the issue. Here's one thing. I could probably answer like a question. If it was too deep, I'm like, I'm smoked. I'm out. Right? And then I have to go call the pro from Dover. But he made me do that. But it made me learn all of aviation in part because he saw this as a developmental position. The other one, basically, I answered the phone, set up his travel, made sure his uniforms were clean.
So did that experience then, did that translate into you becoming a lieutenant colonel?
So it probably helped to have a 3-star write your fitness report to say, hey, this officer knows what he's doing. Again, it's somebody who at the higher levels, people will trust that as an assessment of your talent or lack thereof.
Right, or lack thereof. Let's go back to Civil War staffs, and because it just made me think of this. Ranks. I'm going to guess that if you're a major general, the highest rank on your staff is going to be a brigadier general, or you're not going to have another major general. Correct or no?
So no, Chief of Staff, Butterfield, Major General.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
But otherwise, you're right.
Okay, but go to Lee. Because we
Colonel is the highest staff member, the highest rank in his staff.
Right. So I guess I'm wondering because the Union Army they don't have anything higher than a major general till Grant comes over.
Yeah.
So it's weird, right? If they had a lieutenant general and a full general and everything, like what would it? So let's use Lee as an example. Like the highest rank is colonel.
Colonel
on his staff.
Yep.
So then go down to Lieutenant General Longstreet or Ewell or any of these guys. What's the highest rank on their staff?
Lieutenant Colonel.
Okay.
And then you start to find majors.
So is there a reason for that distance between the ranks? I mean, obviously you want them to be subordinate to you, but
yeah, I think it really comes down to that.
But why Lieutenant General to Lieutenant Colonel? That's a jump.
That's a great question. I don't have a good answer for you. I don't know why there would be why there's necessarily that separation in rank between them, except that they would be subordinate.
Mm. And okay, so now we can go back to the Union Army. So now not the confusion, but the thing is that the Army commander is a major general. So is all the corps commanders, and the division commanders most times. So you've got major generals in 3 different potential roles, right? So the Army commander's chief of staff, Dan Butterfield, he's a major general. Was he the first one to be a major general in the Army of the Potomac, at least, or like
you mean as a
staff? Yeah,
that's a good question.
Like, is he an anomaly, or would it normally have been in like a brigadier?
I'm racking my brain, but I think it has more to do with the anomaly of remember when Meade. Remember, he was the 5th, Butterfield was the 5th Corps commander. Meade replaces him because he was senior. So Hooker, in order to go ahead and unruffle everybody's feathers, brings him up to be his chief of staff. And so that's how he ends up being his chief of staff.
Okay.
Because he comes from Corps Command.
Right.
And that's why he's a major general.
Interesting. Anything else, Mike, that you want to ask?
No, Matt. This was very informative and a good discussion.
So you were assistant to the regional manager?
Yeah, that was it. I would say.
And you had to vacuum his office every day?
As an E3 is a little different than Doug's. So I don't think there's much comparison there.
You were more of a secretary than a staff officer is what you're saying?
No.
Well, you worked on a maid?
Helicopters, and then when I came off from working on helicopters, Doug would know I was in debrief. Mm-hmm. So pilots would come back. I would take all the information, put it into the computer, and then instead of working on the helicopters, I got to enjoy putting things in and making other people do it. But since I had so much extra time, my janitorial experience in my youth really paid off well. And he watched me vacuum one day. He's like, I like those lines. You're going to be my office manager. I was like, oh, shit, that just means more work for me. And that's exactly what it was.
If only I wasn't such a good vacuumer.
Good at those lines, Matt. My God, I could vacuum.
Well, I'll give you $100. Clean this place.
That is the verbal contract, and it's live on the air.
And it's recorded for all to see. Doug, thank you very much for doing this. I really enjoyed this because this is, I'm sure I'm going to have more questions, so we might have to have you come back on and talk more about this because I just find it all very fascinating. And like we've said, like this is the one thing that of all the books that we have around here, in fact, I would say, I don't know if you're familiar with these books here, but our friend Stephen Lunsford has written a series of books. They're The Order of Battle. And he actually, one of the volumes is The Army of the Potomac. It's volume 1, Headquarters and Artillery Reserve. And it's got a lot of information in here, but it's got, a little something about every one of the guys on the staff. It even has the minutes from the Council of War. Good series to get. And he's working on the Army of Northern Virginia now.
Nice.
Yeah. So get a hold of that if you can, ladies and gentlemen. Otherwise, Doug, thank you very much. We'll have you come on for something else.
Awesome.
I like talking to Doug, right, Mike?
No, I think he's a great guest. I think the topic is one you could have like 5 episodes on, because we're so used to, in our generation, either reading books and looking at maps or playing games where armies just move. But when you got 100,000 guys and all of them are eating every single day, yet alone all the horses, and we know how much a Civil War horse needs when it comes to water. The logistics of it.
That would be a cool Civil War game, is if you actually had to worry about all that stuff.
Yeah, you had to write all the orders out to get all the hay in and all those other things. And you basically have no life.
The closest one I've found is called Scourge of War. It's Gettysburg Scourge of War.
I've played it, yeah.
And like if you're Lee, right, you could, there's different levels, and if you pick like the hardest one, you're Lee, you can like write an order, send it to Ewell, and then a little rider will come out from the character of Lee, and he will run all the way to wherever Ewell is on the map, and then it gets to Ewell, and then you'll see all the riders come out from him, and they go to all his subordinate commanders. And, you know, that doesn't mean they carry the order out well. So it's really a cool game, but it will waste an entire day because it is in real time. So they figure out how long it takes these guys to march and everything. Yeah. So and then you can tire them out, and it's pretty cool. They run out of ammo, you know. Yeah, Gettysburg Scourge of War. Anyway, Doug, thank you very much. We'll have you come on again about something else.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, anytime. And come over for some ribeyes.
Yeah, Riha.
You got to learn about pan sauce. Have you ever made pan sauce?
No.
Best thing in the world.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. Thanks for your questions in the audience there. Sorry I just stole them and didn't attribute them to you, but sometimes I do that. That's what I do, because you have better questions than I do sometimes. What, Mike?
I said shocking.
Okay. You have a good day. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Addressing Gettysburg is hosted by Matt Callery, with Mike, Mikey B, Bariski, and Courtney Micker. Produced by Matt Callery. Guides appear gratis, but they would love for you to hire them for a tour on your next visit to the battlefield. To be put in touch with one, send an email to matt@addressinggettysburg.com. Thanks for watching.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down